we turn a negative into a positive, this first one, Mitch.
Yeah.
And Melbourne, a lot of negativity around Melbourne at the moment. And there's some data that's come out which I think is really interesting. It paints an interesting picture. Maybe we'll start there and then we'll sort of start to colour between the lines and hopefully connect the dots for a few people.
Yeah, so we talk of the Victorian policy and particularly how it relates to housing and investors. And some recent numbers have demonstrated that there's been an influx of investors in particular selling their properties in Melbourne. Now, that's been put down to things like land tax, which has gone from $300,000 threshold to a $50,000 threshold.
So the Victorian government's in a bit of debt. So they've got to raise some money. So they're just increasing the taxes in business and property and basically wherever they can, right?
Yep. They've also done some sort of reform where previously you could evict the tenant or terminate a lease for no reason. You can't do that anymore. So all of this stuff sort of contributed to investors having higher holding costs and also more, I guess, onerous terms to comply with. So we've seen actually an influx of investors selling. So the REA, so realestate.com, for those of you who don't know, estimate that 5,000 landlords sold their Melbourne homes since the most recent changes to stamp duty and land tax came in. So that's a fair bit. And I liked this number here where they really dig down into it. So this is effectively saying that they look at the bonds, the active rental bonds that are being held, and that gives you an indication of how many homes are up for rent or being rented. So active bonds sat at 676,400 a year ago. It is now at 654,700, meaning that there is 21,000 fewer rental properties in the Victorian market than there was this time last year, which is a big number when you think about it. So I guess, what does that mean for tenants? What does that mean for values? What does that mean for investors? What's your take on all of that?
Well, I think, Melbourne, first and foremost, is the biggest city in Australia. I think that's a point that often gets missed is, yes, the state government's taken on a lot of debt, but they've done it so that they can become the biggest city in Australia in terms of people. So I think that's sometimes missed in the whole argument and debate. I think as a result, it is the fastest growing city in Australia. There's more people moving to Melbourne than anywhere else in Australia, so there is more demand for housing. Without a doubt, the tax reforms are gonna, in the short to medium term, encourage some investors to sell. But it's not a lot of money. Like when I say that, I think it's $1,100 on a $500,000 block of land. It's not going to make or break whether you can afford to hold a property. I think it's probably more a sentiment-based thing than anything else.
And tax deductible for an investor, the land tax bill.
Deductible, so you're getting a third of it back, give or take.
That as well, yeah.
Yeah, but I think what it is ultimately doing is we are seeing, and I think it's great data from the realestate.com.au guys, because what they're basically saying, look, comparing it to normal years, I think there's about 100,000 home sales a year in Melbourne, give or take. They're basically saying that there's 5,000 of the 100,000 where in normal years they don't sell.
Yeah,
it's an abnormal increase, and they're basically saying that those 5,000 is directly as a result of the land taxes, which probably, to be honest with you, seems rational.
Yeah.
What it's doing though is it's shrinking the rental pool.
Well,
right?
that's what I was just about to say. Like, it's certainly not going to help the housing crisis in terms of tenants being able to find a property because the active rental bonds has decreased. So presumably they're not selling to other investors that are putting tenants in. They must be selling majority to first home buyers or owner occupiers that are moving into those houses. If you're a tenant looking for a property, it's certainly not going to be helping your case, I wouldn't have thought.
Well, I think the best thing you can do is follow the data. Don't get caught up so much in the headlines. And the data is, to your point earlier, there's this time last year, there was 675,000 rental properties in Melbourne. Today, there's only 650,000.
Yep.
So they've lost 25,000. That'd be as a result of a lot of investors selling their homes to owner-occupiers and also not as many homes being built. So you lose 25,000 rental properties out of the pool. When you've got the fastest growing population in Australia, naturally you're going to see rental growth, which is what we're seeing out the other side. I think they're the second highest growing rents, you were saying a couple of weeks back, just under Perth. So you're now seeing the rental market start to increase. If you can take a medium to long-term view, it's the old Warren Buffett quote, right? Be greedy when others are fearful when others are greedy.
Well, yeah, we ran that.
People are fearful. People are fearful of the market more broadly in Melbourne today. That means there's opportunities. You can't take a short-term view because it's probably not going to happen in the next 12 months, let's say.
Yep.
But the median house price in Melbourne is the lowest it's sat against the city median house price since 1989.
Yeah, there may not be another opportunity to purchase in a scenario like that over the short, medium term in Melbourne. So I'm with you. I think bullish long term, but certainly, over the short term, got to be able to hold the property and navigate some turbulence. But I think you've probably seen the worst of it and growth's to come, in my view.
And I guess maybe if I frame it a different way, if you're looking to buy, because you're out there buying today,
Yep.
would it be fair to say that if you were buying in Melbourne versus, say, Southeast Queensland or Adelaide or Perth, those three markets that are, kind of already running, right? Whereas Melbourne, it will go up. It's just it might not go up in the next 12 months. Are you, from a choice point of view, I'd imagine there's more choice in Melbourne.
Yeah,
so you can sort of pick the eyeballs out of some of the best opportunities.
Yep.
Whereas in those other markets, you're probably not, right? You're probably having to kind of get in line and get what you can.
Yeah. Yeah, so Melbourne's gone from doing more than 30,000 sales a year to sort of less than 10,000 in terms of their land market. So there is supply there because demand's obviously gone down on the back of the policy changes we spoke about. There is certainly more bargaining power with the buyer in terms of selection, whereas in Southeast Queensland, Adelaide and Perth, you're sort of just snapping up, or buyers are snapping up whatever's marketed and not really being too selective. So yeah, to your point, as a buyer at the moment, you can sort of pick and choose and cherry pick the deals that you want. And long term, you're going to see the upside in Melbourne for sure.
And the next point is you're just better off buying good property. Good property will always do well for you given enough time. And that is the opportunity that presents in Melbourne at the moment. You're probably going to get your pick of the properties.
Yeah.
Which is also something you can't underrate.
Absolutely.